Well, welcome everybody. My name is Drew Cox, and we are going to do a quick recap of that multi-cloud chat that just went down on Twitter. It was a pretty fast and furious hour of a bunch of industry thinkers, leaders, thought makers who are a part of this chat, and it's been growing every week. So every week in February on Thursdays, there's been a multi-cloud chat where we've brought a group of people together, or a group of people have gathered to kind of discuss some of the ins and outs of multi-cloud, what that means, some of the pros and cons, implications, and it's been really interesting. I've enjoyed being a part of it and hearing kind of what the industry's saying and where some of the different thoughts are. It's been great to get some varying perspective. And so what we're going to do is take a few minutes to kind of recap what happened and flesh it out a little bit. 140 characters and the pace at which we were going makes that a little bit difficult to follow. And so for those of you who are able to follow, well done. Better than I've been able to do keeping up with it. I'll go to respond to someone and it's just been flowing on without me, and I had to catch back up. So without further ado, let's get into it. So there are 4 questions today. We're going to start with the first of those 4. And that question is, what are the surefire signs that your multi-cloud environment is too complex or even out of control? My job here at Rackspace, I deal with customers who are in our OpenStack cloud, our public cloud, and then some additional tooling. So either they've got private cloud, VMware, OpenStack, some other solution along those lines, or another public cloud. So Amazon being the AWS big other option in the world. And we're working with customers to make sure they're getting the most out of their options. So they are in multi-cloud environments very, very often. And at Rackspace, we also have a lot of other tools, a lot of other players who get involved. So Azure is one of those big ones that people are in. And so we often find our customers have come to us with a multi-cloud approach already, and that is in varying degrees of success. A lot of times the pain that brings them into a partnership is something that cropped up out of the blue, like, oh, there's this thing, it's a problem, how do we solve it? And we can work together. We can sit down and come up with good ways forward, but oftentimes you're identifying that your complexity is too far when you're identifying, oh, there's a cloud I didn't realize we were using. How are we going to bring that into compliance with what we're doing as a business, and how are we going to bring that under the strategy that we've built for our approach to our IT? And so there were a lot of thoughts in that vein. So I'm going to go back through some of the tweets that I liked, and we're going to see where some of those are. Walter Bentley, one of the guys that we've had here on this show quite a few times, is a big Ansible guy, and so we always expect to hear him championing Ansible anytime he's in a conversation like this. But one of the ways that he pinpointed a known problem is that your bills are really unexpected. You're not sure what you're going to end up paying for your IT. It's probably gotten out of hand if you get to that point. And then there's a guy here, Deluca, at Deluca on Twitter, said that if it takes longer than an elevator ride to cover the general layout, it's too complicated. And I'm always for simplicity. If you can solve the same problem with less to manage, with more simplicity, that's always going to be valuable. So I think anything that keeps that scale down, Amazon has a very famous pizza test. If you can't hold a meeting with less than 2 pizzas, then your team's too big. Your scope is getting too far out of whack. And I think that's another good, bound to put on that conversation. If you can't quickly describe what you're using and why, then you don't have a clear enough understanding of why you're using those tools. It's gotten a little bit out of hand. A couple of the other thoughts here. When you don't realize that there's a problem until you find a piece you didn't realize has been hacked, or things have been leaked out of that. That attack vector is often a problem. I think security is a huge concern for a lot of people when it comes to multi-cloud. And as you consume more and more clouds, be it as a service products or different infrastructures, your attack vector is growing. And as it grows, your complexity is growing. And once you can't maintain and manage that and respond quickly to problems, to outages, or to breaches, you've gone beyond what you probably should be doing at a period of time. So there were quite a few really good thoughts within that line of thinking, and when complexity has probably gotten out of hand and gone further than it needed to go, and then it's incumbent to rein that back in, to make sense of what you've already done and to be sure you're getting the value you intended originally in a multi-cloud approach. So that was a lot of really good content. Let's take a minute before we go to the second question and thank everybody who's joining. We are live on both Periscope and on Facebook Live, and then we're also on YouTube Live. And so you can interact with us on Twitter. My handle is DrewCoxSA. Feel free to tweet back and forth with me both during this show and on in the future. And then also through the comments in those tools. We really appreciate your interaction, and we're here to keep this conversation rolling. So let's go on to that second question. We're gonna bring that up here quickly. So why is proper management of multi-cloud environments so important? I really look at this question as kind of a key measure of if you're doing well with your approach. I think a lot of times scope creep comes into play, and that really happens everywhere. That's not just an IT thing, but scope creep, I feel like in IT happens quite a bit, especially because oftentimes you have stakeholders who don't fully understand the other's situation. So a business-focused person who doesn't understand the IT side of things can come in and say, "Oh yeah, you guys can do that, right? Make it so, and make it so tomorrow." And the technical side of the house has to struggle to realize a thing that may be an impractical ask from a business side. Or a lot of times you'll have a technical person come in and say, there's this really cool new technology. It has all these bells and whistles. It is fantastic, and we should be adopting it. And they never bring the value statement forward that is really what's going to solve the business's needs. And if they're able to move forward with that new, cool, shiny technology without a clear business why, then you get into that scope creep. And so I think a lot of times that's the governance around that is a good measure of how well managed your multi-cloud environment is. A lot of times businesses require specific things, and you may get outside of what you're really intending to do through either one of those two scenarios, where the business maybe is running something because they were convinced by IT to go ahead and do that, or vice versa. So there was a lot of interesting conversation about that. A lot of times the why isn't clearly stated, and the priorities aren't clearly set forward. And so in a situation where you find yourself in scope creep, being able to put the brakes on and back up and move to a situation where you have a clear picture of what's there, a clear picture of what you're using and why. That's usually a hard prospect, because you're wanting to roll forward, you're wanting to make progress. But a lot of times correcting those things early is going to give you the most benefit moving forward. That's really crucial to have thought through, why are we doing this step? Does it meet our top priority? A lot of times on the business side, they hear cost, and that's the most important aspect, the bottom line. You got to be able to deliver there. If your bottom line is the focus, but you haven't approached the strategy in a way to deliver cost savings, you've just said, well, cloud's cheaper, so let's cloud. You'll find out month after month after month that you never get those costs down. But a lot of times the IT side can see, the amount of work that we do maintaining this stuff is going to go down, so that we can spend that time we were spending with maintenance and management on development and building new features and correcting and improving our efficiency, that can be a huge business benefit, but it has to be communicated between those two parties. I think a lot of times things break down in that discussion between IT and business leaders, and having that clear idea of, what are the terms we're using. Let's be sure we're all using the same definitions for these terms, and being very clear about the value that we're trying to derive, and being very clear early what the goals are, saying this is the most important thing for us is security or efficiency or performance. And once you have that top tier thing, you can spend a disproportionate amount of your resources achieving that. And then as you do that check down of, after we really nail down security, then being performant is of the next most importance. So let's spend the next chunk of money on that performance side of things. A lot of times it's easy to see the new shiny and to see the new tech tools and begin work on a new project that doesn't have a clear connection to a high priority. It's a nice to have, it's on the priority list somewhere, but it doesn't serve the overall goals. And so having that cadence of questioning, what's the next thing that is going to be the most valuable moving forward, is an absolutely crucial piece of that management. I think management is where you're not letting the reins go. You're keeping an eye on scope creep, and you're keeping the business driving towards their goals using your IT. Let's see what other bits of knowledge were dropped during that phase of the discussion. There was a lot of talk of abandonware and of cloud sprawl. I think a lot of times last week, there was a lot of talk about abandonware. On 2 weeks ago, we had Agla in here sharing with us from the OpenStack side of things. She works both as a Racker and as an OpenStack board of directors member. And she coined the phrase last week, or I don't know if she coined it, but she certainly brought it to the discussion of abandonware. And then we talk about cloud sprawl. These are both situations where your footprint grows without controls. And I've seen customers find themselves in situations where they have more resources than they're actually using, but there's a fear of what do we do with some of the stuff that's been built that we don't have a clear understanding of. And a lot of times it's scary to turn something off if you're not doing a good job of maintaining and understanding what these resources do. And you get that scream test situation where you kill it and you wait for somebody to scream and hope no one does. But with the tools that we have, it can be pretty easy to turn that back on, reestablish that resource if needed. And so there are better ways to go about your business than using the scream test when in doubt. So keeping a clear eye on what it is you have, why you have that, and what its life cycle and intended use is going to be, so that you can deprecate it when it's necessary and save yourself the money. I think that's the cloud sprawl is a huge issue. A lot of times you find, oh, I have that account that I never shut down, and I only get billed on it every 6 months because the bill is so small, or I just missed it last time, and now I have to go back and clean that up. And it's a headache to find it after the fact. And if you can have it all audited and understood and contained in one clear way forward, that can be a really useful tool and document that you can use to maintain, manage, and move forward. All right, let's go on to question 3, the next thing we discussed here. What's the number one thing that we should be doing properly to manage these environments? And this is certainly where Ansible talk kicked up for Walter. He's a huge proponent of consistency, and I think that is a huge piece of the discussion. When you're deploying, having a consistent footprint and a consistent cadence and a consistent approach allows, because all that stuff is going to be so the pace is so high, you want to be sure that it's repeatable and that you understand what happens every time, so that when it doesn't happen the way you expect, you're able to jump in and make those adjustments and changes. Another one of our consistent guests has been Eric Johnson. He's part of our technical support for AWS guys. He's an architect there, and his point was you start with one cloud and get it right first. So once you have an approach that you implement and you're happy with, and it solves all the problems that a solution should solve, then you can step forward into a second cloud to get some of those benefits of a tailored solution, something that takes advantage of products and features you may not get in that first cloud, but then you can bring alongside your existing approach. I think the training wheels concept of how you learn to ride a bike is really in play here, where you do something that's simple and has guardrails and is controlled first. Once you get that down, then maybe you take the training wheels off and you do a few things, and then maybe at some point you're doing the crazy BMX half pipes and stuff like that, and you go crazy. But you don't start out there. You don't start out trying to do some big air trick or something insane on downhill biking. You want to start simple, start easy, and slowly increase the complexity of the approach and the difficulties you're dealing with. And slowly is almost a blasphemy in the cloud world, because everything is about pace and about ease of use and about being to market so quickly. But if you get to market very quickly with a very complex solution, managing, maintaining, and troubleshooting that solution is going to cause headaches and business pain you wouldn't otherwise experience, and those can be detrimental to a point that you really wish you had not found yourself in the technical debt you rushed into. I think that's usually how you find technical debt, is that rushed process. We have a couple more bits here on what that first thing should be. Jeff Clutter reminds us that it's too simplistic to say plan correctly. You got to think about staffing, data roadmap, and the list of goals that are needed. Having the right people in place, having the right tools in place, understanding how your data is going to grow and where it needs to shift. Those are all really crucial. I think planning is necessary. We say that all the time, but really fleshing out what that means and that it goes beyond just a couple of trite tenets. You really need to have a clear path set and a clear end goal, and revisit the path that you're on and see that it's still going to land you at that end goal, and verify that that goal hasn't changed. That prioritization can shift very quickly. Often we'll see someone who has been focused on, we really need to save money here. We want the cost savings. We want the cost savings. We want the cost savings. And then something comes up. Maybe they're not built as fault tolerantly as they were because they skimped on a thing, and they go down and realize that that's actually a higher priority. We thought it was cost savings, but it's fault tolerance. So let's move that to the top of the list. And cost's still a major factor, but you have to reapproach. And having just a plan that works is not having a plan that will always work. There's certainly an environment that changes both your business requirements and the tools that are out there on offer. You may have the greatest solution available today, and then you turn around next quarter and there's a greater solution that you could have been taking advantage of. You just hadn't found out about, or a competitor found out about it, and you're now trying to play catch up. And so plan correctly. I would add to that you need to continue to monitor that plan, ensure that it's going to get you where your end goal is. Let's see. There were a couple of others. So Jeff Rutherford has been the guy who's been doing a lot of the hosting and directing of this conversation. And one of the things that he brought up is that third-party auditing is vital to ensure that you've got all of the things that you need, your clarity and security and optimization of the services are there. And it is really, really helpful to have that kind of second opinion, and to have that expert eye and that group that's maybe outside of of the business that can look at it objectively and say, well, I think most of this looks good, but you have an attack vector here that needs to be addressed. And if you really want to get the most out of these resources and out of your IT spend, you might consider using a new feature or a new provider for this specific piece of things. And that's really helpful. And that's something that we believe strongly here at Rackspace. We have broad experts. We have people who either have a deep specialization in a specific technology or who understand the ecosystem and really where to direct the next bit of business and the next bit of solutioning. So we are huge advocates of being that third party in many situations, and coming alongside auditors who are verifying security and who are ensuring privacy and are doing some of those other things that are in table stakes in a lot of industries. So I think that's huge to have that, second opinion, that extra set of eyes that can look at something without the same viewpoint that the customer has, and that extra angle, that extra vantage point can often uncover some opportunity to improve, be that the cost savings or any of those priorities. And that's the conversation you should have with that person, is just setting out the priorities and saying, I understand all the things that are out there and that I could spend an endless amount of my resources on these and never get it all. But I would like to be sure that I at least get to a certain bar with these components. And I would love to also have these if there's room left in the budget, the timeline, et cetera. That's an important part of that conversation. All right, let's move on to the final question. Let's get that covered. So what will we gain by properly managing multi-cloud environments? I think you gain a lot of those things that are promised. You'll hear, cloud is a cost-saving thing. Well, it's not if you're not managing it well. And so that promise is there. You don't get it unless you manage well. You'll have scope creep immediately. You'll find yourself in tools that you don't need, in redundant tools. You'll use 3 or 4 things that at the end of the day probably do about the same thing, but different parts of the business prefer one versus the other. You probably don't need Slack, HipChat, and IRC, all 3 for your chat tool. Pick one, standardize around it. You probably don't need to have every single potential flavor of AWS EC2 instance. Pick the ones that are going to be best tailored for that specific thing. And so you'll find that managing well is going to give you those results. It's going to give you the ability to run a secure and well-governed environment if you manage well. Security is going to get away from you if you're not managing well. You have to keep an eye on that environment if you want to maintain some semblance of security, of an understanding of where you are at risk and where you have been breached and how to end that quickly and to recover. A lot of security has become handling breaches quickly and efficiently and limiting the scope, because it's an arms race. It's a situation where people who are well enough funded and have the time are going to camp out as long as they need to camp out to get to the data that they want to get to. And we've got security people who sit and watch and wait for anything out of the ordinary that they can identify early, stop before it gets to the really sensitive information. Without good management, that completely gets out of control, because there could be entire vectors that are ignored when you talk to your security group, the people who are there ensuring the safety and stability of your approach, of your data, and of the most important pieces of your business. Let's see, there were some other good components to this conversation. So back to properly managing. I think if you don't manage well, a lot of times it's risk avoidance. So you're found in a situation that you need to rectify, and you rush into that solution. It's the triage, but without follow-up. You have to have that follow-up. If you just triage and then move on to the next thing, that Band-Aid's going to fall off, wound's going to get infected, and you're going to have a lot of trouble. And so to have good management long term, you see cost savings. And so we got at Hedvig Inge here talking about that piece. His answer to that last question talks about cloud arbitrage and the reverse auctioning on the horizon. So you've got missed that last part. Short-term risk avoidance versus long-term cost savings. Those are the ways you have to manage well so that you can keep an eye on both sides of your business on what's needed. So that's what I was able to keep up with during the conversation. Next week, we'd like to have at least another guest who's part of the conversation so that we can kind of expose a little bit more of the different vantage points of what a multi-cloud world is going to mean. The scope is continuing to grow. Cloud means so many different things to so many different people, and multi-cloud is getting into corners of businesses that weren't even realized a year or 2 or 3 ago. And so as that continues to be the case, we want to bring additional viewpoints to the table to have that discussion. So next week, we're going to do the same thing. We'll have a guest share their vantage point as well. And you'll be able to share your vantage point. We're going to have the same multi-cloud chat happening on Twitter. It's going to happen on Thursday at 11 Central, and then we're going to follow that up at noon with a show like this. So thank you all for joining. We appreciate your time. All of the places that you found yourself and found us. We're glad you made it, and we will talk to you guys next week.